Thank you for joining us for this special edition of KPBS News. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Rent is due this weekend. For those who can't pay due to COVID-19, local governments have put evictions on hold for months. But many of those protections are set to expire in the coming weeks. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler tells us how the clock is ticking.
The scale of the crisis is staggering. According to a study by the consulting firm Stout, over 40% of California's renters are currently unable to pay their full rent and are at risk of eviction. In San Diego, with its already elevated rents and lack of affordable housing, the issue looks very much the same. Tenants like Imperial Beach resident Patricia Mendoza suddenly saw their income zeroed out. She was laid off in April and didn't get her first unemployment benefits until June. She hasn't paid her rent in months.
It's extremely hard. Because like I said, I'm the only one here. I'm supposed to keep my children safe, and how am I supposed to do that when we're about to get evicted, when these moratoriums lift?
She's waiting for some plan to come together to help tenants deal with their months of unpaid rent, at a time when the economy has no prospect of recovery soon, and low-income communities are being hit the hardest by the pandemic.
Help us. Help us, low-income communities. Help our Black and brown brothers and sisters, because we need this help right now. Who else can we go to? Our elected officials. They're supposed to do something right. They're supposed to listen to us.
Right now, the region has several overlapping moratoriums placed on possible evictions, but many of them have already expired or are set to expire within weeks. The most pressing date for San Diego residents is now August 14th, when the state's Judicial Council could reopen eviction proceedings across the county in places without an ongoing moratorium. That means lawmakers at the local, state, and national level have 2 weeks to come up with some solution. The San Diego City Council voted in June to spend $15.1 million of federal CARES Act money to create an emergency rental assistance program, which would help around 3,500 families pay their rent. But that doesn't come close to filling the financial obligations of San Diego's renters.
It's going to take government dollars, I believe, whether it's local, city, county, or state dollars to help this crisis. This is no different than the COVID-19. It's a crisis that could explode all at once, all over us.
With unemployment benefits now cut nationwide, San Diego's tenants and landlords have pinned their hopes on Sacramento. Bay Area Assemblymember David Chu is the author of Assembly Bill 1436. It would allow renters in financial distress to stretch out their rent payments accrued during the pandemic until April 2022, and possibly beyond. It would also make it so unpaid rent during the pandemic can't be the sole basis for an eviction.
We all know that it is completely unreasonable to suggest that if you have been out of work or have seen your income drop dramatically, that come August 14th, you're magically going to have the money to pay any unpaid back rent in the last couple of months.
The bill also includes mortgage forbearance provisions for landlords. Last week, a group of landlords held a press conference in support of AB 1436. One of those was San Diego landlord Ginger Heitzke, who owns 449 units of housing across San Diego and Orange County. She doesn't want this housing crisis to be a repeat of 2008, where investors were able to move into a distressed housing market, buy foreclosed properties, and drive up rents.
I feel like I'm looking at this thing from the perspective as a real estate professional, and it terrifies me. Because, renters, particularly, renters on the lower scale of income, they just are in the habit of being in the business of just being people. They're not real estate professionals.
But not all landlords are quite on board with the bill. Todd Henderson is a fourth-generation San Diego landlord. He says that without more financial support, bills like AB 1436 are just kicking the can down the road and could leave tenants with an insurmountable amount owed to landlords.
Individuals who really are in those positions, frankly, are probably going to pack up and leave in the middle of the night and leave. And that does happen. We have that happen on a somewhat regular basis.
With the clock ticking, it's now up to state legislators and Governor Gavin Newsom to craft a response to the looming eviction cliff that many other cities across America are now falling off of. Tenants like Patricia Mendoza are counting on it.
When we see Governor Newsom say we're in this together, we just want to be accounted for. That's it. We want to be in it together, that's it.
Max Rivlin-Adler, KPBS News.
And of course, people who can't pay if they don't have money. And soon, those who lost their jobs will have less of it due to a major cut in unemployment benefits. KPBS reporter John Carroll has more on the loss of that $600 boost.
The extra money provided through the CARES Act has proved a lifeline for millions of unemployed Americans. Now, as it ends, organizations in San Diego that work to help the unemployed are doing what they can.
At the Workforce Partnership, we're here for all the laid off workers and all the employers who have had to go through this as well.
Peter Kallstrom is the president and CEO of the San Diego Workforce Partnership, a nonprofit that works to connect people looking for work with potential employers. They have a lot of resources at their website, workforce.org.
We have this on-demand video library with an array of trainings from companies like Microsoft. So they've been able to offer a lot of skills and pathways for little to no cost.
KPBS News put out a request on social media to ask how the end of the $600 a week benefit will affect people. From David, the extra $600 has kept my family and small business still open. And from Joe Kinney, it will kill us. We received a lot more comments like that from our viewers and listeners, all of them heartbreaking. But in Sacramento, a lifeline might be coming together. State legislators are looking at taking over payment of the $600 a week benefit.
That agreement hasn't been made yet, but if it is, one of the ideas thrown out is we could make up the difference in whatever the federal government decides on doing.
But Gonzalez says to do that, the state would have to borrow $100 billion, a tough sell even in good economic times. Still, she says lawmakers are well aware that the loss of the $600 benefit means economic catastrophe for lots of Californians.
We're going to end up with a huge housing crisis, a mortgage crisis, as well as a renter's eviction crisis. We're going to end up with people basically starving to death. I mean, it's not tenable.
The legislature must have their budget complete by the end of August. For now, unemployed Californians look to Washington and Sacramento and wait and worry. John Carroll, KPBS News.
San Diego County remains on the state's COVID-19 watch list, and the numbers don't indicate that will change anytime soon. There are now more than 28,000 cases locally since March, with more than 550 deaths. To our east, Imperial County is now approaching 10,000 cases and 200 deaths. This week, San Diego County modified its public health order. It now requires employers to notify workers of cases linked to their business. KPBS investigative reporter Claire Tregesser says the process of finding out how COVID-19 is spreading has been a struggle.
The county set a goal that 70% of new case investigations would begin within 24 hours. Currently, just 11% of case investigations meet that goal. Part of the reason is likely because the county does not have enough case investigators. Case investigators are the people who call and question a person who has tested positive for COVID-19.
There's a real art to it because you're catching people in a really vulnerable moment, right? Like that's not a great phone call.
Rebecca Fielding Miller is an epidemiologist at UC San Diego.
And so you want people who are really empathetic and ideally multilingual and culturally competent and who can really kind of sit with people in a moment of discomfort and both provide them with resources, make it very clear that they need to self-quarantine and get this information out of them. So it's tricky.
Here's how the process works. Case investigators make a long phone call to find out who's been in contact with the infected person. Then they pass that information on to a contact tracer who calls all of the contacts of the infected person. So case investigators have to kick off the work the contact tracers do, and the county needs more of them. San Diego County currently has 270 case investigators and 232 contact tracers, and is in the process of hiring and training 253 more. Fielding Miller says the county missed an opportunity to better contain COVID-19 by not hiring more case investigators earlier on in April or May.
I think if we had had double or triple the number of contact tracers that we set a goal for in April, we would be in a really different situation right now.
Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
A local startup is helping San Diego meet the demand for testing. KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento got a behind-the-scenes look at their work.
This is Boots. He's an automated liquid handling platform at Helix Laboratory in La Jolla. He gets his name from a star constellation and shouts it out loud anytime he needs attention from lab staff like Jason Nguyen.
Booties, booties, bo.
Well, he has trouble with the double O, so it's Booties.
So it's Boots, but we can't get a robot to say that.
In a room full of similar devices, Boots' calls alert Nguyen that his machine needs help.
To get attention there, it calls out its name, and then you can just go directly there. So each one of these we've personified.
Boots is the first in a series of automated machines running COVID tests from county sites, and they demand consistency. But today, Boots can't find the barcode on one of the dozens of test tubes he's about to handle.
Booties, booties.
Nguyen thinks frequent use of hand sanitizer may have rubbed a bit of it off.
Yeah, we have some with the known issue with the alcohol.
The minor hiccup requires Nguyen to enter the ID manually and another person to verify. Machines like Boots and his roommate, Cassiopeia, depend on uniformity to process thousands of tests in a day. But their services and the daily supplies needed to keep them running are in high demand across the country.
We're doing something like 600,000 tests a day in the U.S. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, we didn't do any of those.
Mark Laurent is vice president of operations at Helix, the lab where Boots resides. The startup focuses on the human genome, but jumped into COVID testing as the need grew.
Every single one of that tests requires a tube. That's every day. So these are millions of tubes a week that essentially were not planned for.
Helix needs at least 2,000 tubes a day for its testing agreement with the county, but Vice President of Quality and Research and Development David Becker says it's not easy to use just any tube.
You don't get a tube that is half an inch in diameter one day and 3/4 of an inch in diameter the next day. That your robotic systems and your processes don't handle those very well.
It can take time and human effort to reprogram with every fluctuation. Helix operations head Laurent says they work directly with producers to better handle any upcoming challenges.
We've been working directly with the manufacturer to understand what option they had at time for a given week. To understand, okay, so the normal supply is constrained. Do you have another tube that's close enough that we could adjust to and work with?
There are even greater constraints on the chemicals that help detect coronavirus and plastic tips that pour them, called pipettes. Machines are proprietary, and these components aren't always interchangeable. Plus, about a dozen pipettes are required for every specimen, and they're each tossed in the trash after use. This can mean limited options when a supplier runs out. County health officials dealt with a similar dilemma earlier this month. A supplier said it had to temporarily cut the county's weekly shipments of collection materials, also known as testing kits.
We were facing a real tough situation of needing to close down some of our county testing sites.
County Health Agency Director Nick Mascione says Helix provided a last-minute reprieve.
Our ability to test will stabilize because of this new partnership. But we're always looking to bolster our resources. In fact, that's how we found Helix.
CEO Mark Stapley said Helix made some decisions to help reduce restrictions on its testing kits. They selected a type of swab that's more abundant, at least for now, and a transport media that can stay at room temperature instead of chilled.
You need the refrigeration either in the packaging or the transportation itself in order to keep everything at a stable temperature. And so we've obviated that issue with the supply chain by picking the transport media we did.
Still, the company will have to further navigate the challenges as it plans to significantly expand its testing capacity to 10,000 by the fall, and possibly even grow to 25,000. That'll use other machines known as sequencers that Helix staff nicknamed Vesuvius and Fuji. But the first stop in the process will still be Boots.
Booties, booties.
Sorry, Booties. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
California is likely to reach 500,000 COVID-19 cases this weekend, and as a result, the state is extending the special enrollment deadline for Covered California. You can now sign up for health care coverage through the state-run marketplace through August. All screening and testing for COVID-19 is free, and all plans offer telehealth options. You can find out more at coveredca.com. Congress is working on another round of loans for struggling businesses under the Paycheck Protection Program known as PPP. Our partner station KPCC mapped the winners and losers in the race for loans. KPBS's investigative reporter Amita Sharma shows us where local businesses had a tough time getting any money.
My name is Andrew Benavides. I own Cafeina Cafe, and I applied for a PPP loan back around April.
Just 1 month into the pandemic and 1 year into his long-held dream of owning a business, his City Heights coffee shop sales dropped by half.
And people decided not to go out anymore.
26-year-old Benavides hoped to use the federal loan as a lifeline to cover rent, utilities, inventory, everything that keeps a business afloat. But officials told him he wasn't eligible.
According to them, at the time, I didn't fall under one of their qualifications, which was having employees.
Mom and pop stores and one-man shops such as Benavides' Cafeina often have fewer than 10 employees. Having fewer workers made it harder to qualify for badly needed government aid.
Also, the rules kept changing.
Enrique Gandaria is executive director of the City Heights Business Association.
It's just not a good situation for small businesses.
Especially in some poorer communities of color like City Heights, which received a total of 317 loans. That money, according to federal data, helped save around 1,500 jobs. In contrast, Claremont, north of I-8 and where more than half the population is white, got 800 loans and retained over 3,600 jobs. Claremont's population is actually just under a quarter smaller than City Heights. Gandaria blamed that wide gap on many small businesses lacking access to accountants, lawyers, and bankers who can help navigate what may be for some a complex bureaucratic process. He also blamed poor loan outreach in areas that are low income, of color, and ethnically mixed.
Well, in City Heights, we have a community that's extremely diverse, with many first-generation immigrants that are entrepreneurs, very entrepreneurial. But they come from countries where they don't trust the government for very good reasons. And they're not used to dealing with government agencies.
There are also big margins in the number of PPP loans given out to some cities north and south of the 8 freeway. Chula Vista got 2,200 PPP loans and saved over 21,000 jobs. Carlsbad businesses obtained 3,400 loans, preserving more than 38,000 jobs. Escondido appears to be an outlier. The North County ethnically diverse city secured 2,100 loans and held on to 32,000 jobs. It's one of the cities that was more efficient in a key goal of the program, job preservation.
Cities like Escondido, El Cajon, La Mesa, their small businesses saved over 6.5 jobs per loan, whereas in Encinitas, for example, it was only 4.4 jobs per loan.
SDSU business lecturer Miro Kopik says overall the distribution of loans was aligned with the distribution of businesses in the county. Kopik agrees the government should have done a better job in letting underserved communities know the loans are available and how to apply. But he adds that the PPP still served its mission in getting small loans out to small businesses.
The number of loans less than 150,000 is 85% of the PPP loans that were processed in San Diego County.
As for Benavides, he says he'll apply for the next round of PPP loans.
We don't need too much, but we still need a lump sum just to keep our lights on.
Amita Sharma, KPBS News.
Local leaders announced a pool of existing money would be targeted toward small businesses in underserved communities. KPBS reporter Shalina Chatlani says the money will help many businesses that were left out before.
I'm
sitting here at Gentry's Barbershop in Southeast San Diego getting a haircut from Mr. Stanley over here, the owner of the shop. It's one of the many businesses in San Diego that's been affected during the coronavirus pandemic. The city has announced that it's shelling out an extra amount of money to help businesses like this stay afloat. That loan could come from a pocket of money that's been granted to the city of San Diego from federal aid dollars via the CARES Act. About $13 million went into a small business relief fund. Mayor Kevin Faulconer announced a proposal for $700,000 from that pool of money and possibly other funds would be targeted toward minority-owned businesses like Gentry's.
A recent analysis by Sandag showed that the Black and Hispanic residents in our community are 4 times more likely than whites that live in neighborhoods that have been impacted by COVID-19 and unemployment. That's incredibly important. For our Asian American residents, they're twice as likely compared to whites.
Faulconer says he's working with the County of San Diego to match the funds. Jason Paguillo of the Asian Business Association of San Diego says the $700,000 is intended to help small businesses in underserved communities that were left behind in the first round of relief aid. Around half of the $13 million CARES Act dollars were supposed to go to minority small businesses, but he says,
even though a lot of things were restricted at first and then they were lifted as they changed the restrictions on that funding, it prevented new businesses from being able to apply or those that didn't before. So this gives us that extra ability to get to businesses that typically or that didn't apply the first time around.
He says a lot of minority business owners were left behind in the first round of small business application loans because the paperwork was too complicated or they needed language translators. So he says this targeted funding from that pool of money is intended to help with technical assistance. Considering, though, that there are millions of dollars in the fund.
We're still asking for more money, which is part of the reason to ask with the county and trying to do a match and saying, hey, can we partner on this?
The mayor's proposal will go to full city council for a vote in the coming weeks. Shalina Chatlani, KPBS News.
Many of us are still working from home, and that's disrupted the region's traffic patterns. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says that's shaking up San Diego's transportation goals.
Rush hour on the freeways isn't what it used to be, with many people working from home. But the county's transportation planning agency, Sandag, says car travel bottomed out in April and has been rising ever since. The same is true for air pollution, which is back to where it was about 5 years ago. Antoinette Meyer is Sandag's Director of Mobility and Innovation. She told the agency's board members more teleworking can help lower greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not a panacea, and it tends to help mostly white and upper-income workers.
For just about everyone that works in an industry like hospitality, which is a sector that employs a lot of people in our region, or in other essential industries like agriculture or healthcare support or transportation services, these jobs are much less likely to be able to be done at home, and they're often lower wage jobs.
Public transit ridership is also down, but slowly recovering. Many of those who continue to ride buses and trolleys are essential workers with no access to a car.
So as we plan for a future transportation system with equal access to jobs and education and community services, quality public transit is vital to making those critical connections equitably.
Sandag says it's incorporating more ambitious teleworking goals into its regional transportation plan, the framework of which will be unveiled in a few weeks. That will lay out where and what kind of transportation infrastructure the region will need decades from now. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
Organizers of the Kabuki Music Festival had big plans to move the event to downtown San Diego this year, but now that is not happening. This week, Kabuki announced this year's festival is canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Passes had already been sold, and those people will be notified about getting a refund. The plan was to hold the event in September in the area around Petco Park, after several years at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. The San Diego Zoo and Safari Park are still welcoming visitors. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson shows us how they're staying open despite added restrictions.
Dennis Peter drove down from Los Angeles to visit the zoo with his son and fiancée. He had to double check to make sure the facility was even open.
We weren't sure how it was going to be, but did my research and we decided we're going to come have a family day.
They had plenty of company, even though the zoo is limiting the number of people who can be in the park because of COVID-19. Imperial Beach resident Mark Jones was visiting for the second time in 2 days.
There's signs posted everywhere, especially at the exhibits.
there's a high touch area. So they have these signs that say, you know, if you touch the glass, just keep in mind to wash your hands after. There's hand sanitizer everywhere, and to make sure everybody's wearing their masks.
Those things are happening in part because the state issued strict guidance in June for the facility to reopen. And while zoo officials are happy to be operating, they concede there's been some confusion since the governor tightened public rules in July because infections were climbing. Indoor zoos and museums had to close again. The San Diego Zoo is primarily an outdoor experience, and they met all the safety guidelines, but they're still getting about 1,000 calls a day.
They see it on the website, they've heard it in other places, but there's still sometimes people really need that reassurance from a voice on the other end of the phone.
Zoo Chief Marketing Officer Ted Moulter says written guidelines are clear, but when the news was delivered, it was a bit ambiguous. He's happy the zoo is welcoming visitors, and he wants to see other attractions open.
Seeing that hotels are open, seeing there's activities on the beaches, and that there are things for people that live here, as well as some folks that might come in from a little distance. They can stay here safely, they can visit the zoo, they can visit the park, and there's enough things for them to do.
Zoo officials are hoping that these lines continue to be busy moving forward, but a lot will depend on their COVID response activities and also state guidance. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
And that's all for this special edition of KPBS News. For all of us here at KPBS, I'm Maya Trabulsi. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.